I'm Debra Mason and a co-founder and COO at Taboom Media. I'm also an award-winning journalist and a professor who has specialized in religion and media for more than 30 years. Today's video is for journalists in local, regional, and even international and national news media. Now, in it, I'll explain why religion is important for journalists to understand, and what does it mean to be religiously literate. And finally, what are some key principles when reporting on religion and when religion is a part of the story? Journalists often avoid covering religion. That's because it's extremely complicated and it's very easy to get it wrong. It's sometimes easier to ignore religion. But by avoiding the religion angle in stories, journalists are often ignoring the most important part of a story. By the way, when I use the word religion here, I'm including everything under the category of faith and values. So not just members of large religious institutions such as the Roman Catholic Church or Sunni Islam, or members of individual local Pentecostal congregations. It also includes people who say they have no religion. Regardless of how you define it, religion is important because it often influences people's views on moral and cultural issues. But more than that, religion encompasses deep-seated beliefs that people often use to decide everything from how to dress to where to send their children to school or where to give their money. We also know that religion is often used to define people's moral views on SSOGIE issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this video. But first, let's talk about what journalists need to understand about religion in order to do a better job of including it in their stories. We call this being religiously literate. Professor Diane Moore at Harvard University describes religious literacy as the ability to recognize, understand, and analyze, using diverse perspectives, the complicated ways religion intersects with social, political, and cultural life. Specifically, Professor Moore says a religiously literate person will possess a basic understanding of the history, important sacred texts when applicable, beliefs, practices, and contemporary rituals of several world religions as they arose out of and are still being shaped by world contexts and events. A religiously literate journalist recognizes religion's role in politics, society, and cultures that are very different across different time periods and across different places. A religiously literate journalist also understands that reading the Bible or the Quran or other sacred scriptures does not mean that you know a lot about how that scripture was formed, put together, and passed down over the centuries and centuries and millennia, and how eventually was translated into hundreds of languages. Some of the other videos in this series talk specifically about the individual passages in the Bible and the Quran that have been weaponized to harm LGBTQI plus people. The same is true of going to church or synagogue or temple or the mosque. Even if you go to, say, Mass every day, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily religiously literate. But it does mean that you are a religiously adherent individual. But going to Mass more isn't going to necessarily increase your knowledge about diverse religions or the historical contexts by which the Bible was passed down, for instance. So being religiously literate as a journalist is being a professional journalist seeking to understand how a person's religion affects their actions in the world, rather than attempting to convince others that a certain religious viewpoint is the correct one. In other words, Reporting and writing about religion is exactly the same as trying to report in a fair and balanced way about politics, health, business, and even sports. When religious adherence is high, that is, when people say that they practice a religion at very high levels, so too are anti-LGBTQI plus attitudes. And now I'm going to show you some illustrations of survey data from Pew Research Center that explains this a little bit better and shows you what I mean. This first map shows data about religious adherence on the African continent, among other places. And where the shading is darker, it means that a higher percentage of that country's population say that they practice a particular religion and go to regular services for a particular religion at a more intense level, that is, at a higher percentage than in those places where the color is less saturated, where the colors are lighter. Now, the second map shows attitudes within countries toward LGBTQI plus human rights issues. So that might be in regard to gay marriage or laws regarding sodomy, for instance. We know that acceptance of LGBTQI plus human rights issues is less supportive, less accepting in some of these same countries where religious adherence is very, very high. When reporting on religion, I'm going to mention several key guidelines to help you include religion in ways that are accurate, balanced, and that bring truth to your journalism. Most of these fall in the category of being religiously literate. But let's dive a little deeper into what we mean specifically in regard to SSOGIE issues. And we'll talk about 3 important points. I'm going to talk about separating facts from personal beliefs. I'm going to talk about seeking diverse viewpoints, and I'm going to talk about seeking to understand the earthly motivations such as money and power, which are intricately linked to some religious organizations. My colleague Brian Pellet has talked about separating myths from facts, but when we talk about religion, we also need to separate our own deeply held beliefs from facts and other people's deeply held beliefs from facts. We're not trying to prove anyone's personal beliefs are right or wrong, for that matter, but we are trying to make sure that our reporting doesn't repeat something that's a belief or a fact. For example, a myth would be that Jesus condemned homosexuals. But in no place did Jesus use the word homosexual. So be very careful when you report and write about these things. Don't assume that the science backs up what is actually a belief and not a fact. The second important point is to seek diverse viewpoints. This is really important when it comes to religion for a number of reasons. Number one, most large religious institutions are led by men. If we do not include lay people, including women, then we are getting a viewpoint that does not include half of the population. It's also very hard to adhere to all the demands of a religious tradition. And sometimes some people who belong to certain religious organizations may not even believe or agree with some of the viewpoints that the official doctrine or the official teachings from leadership indicate in regards to a wide variety of issues, but including LGBTQI plus issues. And if you never go beyond official religious leaders, then you're going to have a hard time really finding out what the average believer thinks and feels about certain issues. It's also really important to understand that there are religious organizations that do support human rights and equal rights for LGBTQI plus individuals. The Episcopal Church, for instance, in the United States, individual Lutheran congregations, for example, some Baptist congregations. As we know from this video series, there are Muslims and imams who are supportive of LGBTQI plus individuals. So the third point that I want to make is understanding earthly motivations and money. And we refer to this as prosperity gospel, the prosperity gospel. So what is the prosperity gospel? This, first of all, is a gospel that is quite frequently preached by individuals who are Pentecostal or apostolic or holiness. And sometimes these individuals, these religious leaders, have ministries that are getting their money from outside organizations, outside the country, outside the continent, including from the West. And a number of homophobic hate groups, particularly in the United States, send millions of dollars to African countries to support prosperity gospel theologians and clergy and other congregations that similarly preach hate and abuse toward LGBTQI plus individuals. The core theology of the prosperity gospel is about prospering. It's about being wealthy. It's about being financially prosperous. Sometimes that language will mean other kinds of prosperity as well, having many children, owning a large home. The notion is that if you are a faithful servant, and if you pray to God, and if you do whatever the prosperity gospel leadership says you should do, often donate money or do other sorts of actions, then you will be blessed by God with prosperity. And this theology is effective, really, especially in places where there is a struggle economically, where individuals need the promise of a better life, a better hope for the future. The problem is with the leaders, the ministers and the pastors and the church leaders, who are themselves prospering, usually, quite well. It's really important for journalists to understand that this happens, to investigate it when possible, to view these individuals with, say, the same kind of clarity, the same kind of investigative reporting approaches and tools that are used on politicians, because these are often corrupt religious leaders. To repeat, when you cover religion, or when religion is a component of a story, particularly the SSOGIE story, remember to be religiously literate. Remember to separate your personal faith views from what are facts. Remember that covering religion or including religion in SSOGIE issues, just like reporting any aspect of a SSOGIE issue, means the values, the professional journalistic values of truth, accuracy, and insight are paramount, no matter what. And that's what we uphold, and that's what we strive for in all things when we are professional journalists. And finally, be aware and remember that Religious leaders are human, and sometimes what they're doing is not legal, is not in the best interests of their congregants, or is actually damaging and harmful. And this can especially be true in terms of their preachings in regard to SSOGIE issues. I hope you found this helpful. There are other resources on Taboom's website, and I welcome you reaching out to me at some point, and we can talk about this more later. Good luck.